Hi, welcome to my channel. Would you like to know how to make a music video with Blender? Then take a look at this video. I created this clip for Vero's music channel, and if you like good music, just take a look. I'll leave a link down below. If you're new to Blender and want to watch some additional tutorials, I'll leave some links down in the description. You can also download the original Blender file and use it in any way you like. Before we start, I'll give you a quick overview of the most important features in this video.
Was breaking through.
Okay, now let's start from scratch. First of all, I'm creating some folders where I will save the different files we create in this video. It's called The Making of Funeral, and I'm making some subfolders for audio, images, 3D models, the Blender folder, and finally the Blender render folder. I put the audio clip into the audio folder, we will need it later. I've also prepared a ton of license-free images, which we put into the images folder. So that's all for the preparations. Now we can start Blender. Let's start with a new general project and reset everything to the default values so we can have a clean start. Next, we need to activate a few free add-ons which we will use in this project. That's basically the node wrangler and some additional curve objects. Now save the preferences and we are ready to start. Blender usually takes a lot of render time, so let's optimize that. Let's choose Eevee as a rendering engine with 20 render samples, ambient occlusion, bloom, screen space reflections and motion blur. We want to render a 4K video, so let's set that. At 40 to 160, 24 frames per second, that's fine. We chose the Blender render folder as the output folder, so we'll find our render files easily. And just name it. Let's choose FFmpeg as an output format and QuickTime as the encoding format. Output quality should be very high. We want to use AAC as an audio codec. Now let's save the file into the Blender folder. Next we import our audio track, so let's go to the video sequencer and add the sound from the audio folder. Yep, it has 7347 frames, so the video should be right that long. We also need to sync the video track with the audio. Now back to our 3D viewport. We will use the default cube for creating our tiles. So let's make a new collection and place the cube there. Rename it tiles, move it in and rename the cube to tile.001. Let's scale it down a bit. The scale is basically the size of the images I prepared. And apply all transforms. Now let's switch over to edit mode and set the origin of the cube to the bottom. Activate face select, click anywhere and select the bottom face of the cube. Now press Shift S and set a 3D cursor to the selected plane. Now back to object mode and set the origin of the cube to the 3D cursor. Set the Z location of the cube back to 0 and apply all transforms. Again Shift S and reposition the cursor to the word origin. Now that's it. Next we want to project some images on the cube, so back to edit mode. Select the front face. Open the materials tab and go to the shader editor. Now let's rename the material to material.001 and let's add an image texture. Let's connect the color with the base color and open the image file. Now we need a node wrangler, so press Ctrl T and let's switch to texture view. Now you can see the projection of the image is not quite what we expected. So we need to fix that. Alright, now let's switch over to the UV editor and fix the projection. First we need to UV unwrap the image. Let's use Smart UV Project. Then we drag the edges of the projection to fit the image wholly. Now back to the shader editor. Looks much better, we just have to rotate it. That's it. Now back to edit mode. Select the back plane of the cube. Assign the image to this plane. Switch to object mode. Open the UV editor and correct the projection of the back plane. Back to the shader editor and it looks perfect now. Next we need to change the material of the side planes. So select all the side planes by clicking and holding the Shift key. Add a new material, call it base material and give it a color. Assign it to the selected planes. Switch back to object mode and here we go. Next I want to bevel the edges of the cube, so back to edit mode. Select edge select. Shift click all the edges. Go to edge, bevel edges. And set the number of segments to something like 5. And shade it smooth. Still doesn't look completely right, so we need to change something more. Go to the object data properties, normals and auto smooth. Perfect. Now let's add our ground plane the cubes will be placed on. Resize it to something like 50 meters. And let's get a material from Quixel Bridge. You first need to download the app. It's completely free. You just need to create a free account. I highly recommend this app. It has lots and lots of free materials and meshes, everything free and directly connected with Blender. Next you open Quixel Bridge and sign in. Go to Surfaces and I want to add some grassy ground. First click on the download button to download it. I already did that. Go to Export Settings and choose Blender as the export target. It needs a plugin which I already installed. It's done automatically when you choose Blender. Now hit the export button and the materials will automatically be transferred to Blender. Now back to shader editor, we just have to select the newly imported material. Once again we will need the node wrangler, so press Ctrl T and connect the vector of the mapping node with the vector of the image nodes. Now change the scaling of the mapping to -15 so it will have a perfect fit. Now we change to rendered mode to see how it looks. Let's tweak a bit with the metallic and roughness settings so it will look a bit better. Now we need to add a spiral, which will be the path where the tiles will be placed. Increase the turns to 5, the steps to something like 50 and the radius growth to 1.5. Scale it up a bit. Now let's duplicate our tiles with an array modifier. Set it to fit curve and choose the spiral as the curve. Scale up the factor. Next add a curve modifier to the tile. Choose the spiral as the curve object. And you see that we have now a lot of tiles following the curve. Scale the spiral down a bit. And look what we have here. Now let's apply both modifiers from top to bottom. You can see that it's still just one object, which we have to fix later. But first let's add a rigid body, and when you start playing the animation you will see that it will just fall down. To fix this, let's add another plane, scale it up to 50. And add a passive rigid body to it. Now back to edit mode and let's separate all tiles into different objects. You can see that we now have a lot of tiles which all look the same. To change that, let's go to the shader editor, select the material, then duplicate it and choose another image. We have to do this for all the tiles, which will take a while, so I'll just move forward quickly. Okay, I'm done. You see each tile has its own image now. Now select all tiles and change the origin to the center of the volume. so they will fall down properly. Next we need to download some free stuff from Sketchfab. I'll leave the link down below. I highly recommend this site. I'm searching for a fireball and download it as a GLDF file. Now let's import this file. You see it's way too big, so we need to scale it down. The different parts of the mesh are wrapped in the Sketchfab model, so now we have to look for the mesh objects and unparent it. Let's rename the mesh to Fireball and move it into the scene collection. Now we can delete the rest of the Sketchfab model. Scale the fireball down a bit more. Okay, that fits. Move it up a bit. And apply all transforms. Now back to the timeline. Open up another window and go to the shader editor again. Reduce the emission strength to 0 and keyframe it by pressing I. Now we switch to the graph editor to add an audio visualizer. Select key, bake sound to F curves and select our audio file. You see the curve changes in the timeline, but we need to add an envelope modifier to increase the output values. Add a control point at frame 1 and scale the max value way up. Now back to Sketchfab. Let's download our main model. It's already animated, but we just need the model to animate it in Mixamo. Here we go. This time download it as an FBX file, because this one can be processed in Mixamo. Now let's go to the Mixamo site, which is another free site from Adobe, which has wonderful animations which you can import into Blender. You just need a free account. Okay, I'm logged in now and I will upload the character which I downloaded from Sketchfab. You can see that the animation is applied to our new character. First, let's look for an idle animation. Looks good. Maybe just increase the character arm space a bit. Download the animation with skin and 24 frames per second. Now let's download some more animations, which we will need later in the video. Let's reduce some parameters to match the speed of our audio file.
And then I heard them lift a box and creak across my soul.
Download it again, but this time without skin, because we need the skin just once. Okay, I just download a few more animations, the same way we did before.
As all the heavens were ablaze, and being but an and I in silence some strange rays, wrecked, solitary here. And then a plank in reason broke, and I dropped down and down and hit a world at every plunge and finished knowing
Okay, that's the last one. Now let's import the idle animation, which we downloaded with the skin. Let's rename the armature to female. And the animation to idle. Let's move it just a bit down and apply the transforms. Now back to Quixel Bridge, where we download the material. We want to paint our female in gold. Export it. Then select the mesh, not the armature. Rename it to female mesh. Switch over to the shader editor and select the material. Move the metallic factor way up and rescale the armature.
and mourners to and fro kept
Good.
treading
Now let's parent the female armature to the fireball by shift and drag, so they will move together.
was breaking
Open the non-linear animation editor and push down the idle animation.
and when they all were
Now open the properties panel, select strip, open action clip
service like
and repeat the animation 18.5 times so it matches the length of the video.
kept beating
Let's add a spotlight to the scene. Rename it to female light.
going on.
Open the properties. Give it a yellow color. Increase the power. Change the radius, the size, and the blend factor. Also change the location of the light. Let's switch to rendered mode. Looks okay for now.
And then I heard them lift up
Shift drag the female light onto the fireball so it gets parented,
and creak across
and change the rotation.
with the same
Now back to our spiral. Let's switch to edit mode and switch the direction of the curve.
space.
Now we need our fireball to follow the curve of the spiral, so let's add a follow path modifier and set the target to the spiral. Also check follow curve and click animate path. You see that the whole object moves to the start of the spiral. Select the data properties of the spiral and see if everything's okay. Back to the fireball.
Some strange rays,
Move it into the middle between the tiles.
solitary here.
Looks good.
And then a plank
Now move the light on top of the female.
and I drop down and down
Now we need to rotate the fireball
and hit
so the female is looking ahead.
at every plunge and finished no
And when we hit the play button, you can see that the whole mesh is moving along the spiral. Okay, back to frame 0. Now I want to mark some important key points in the video where some action will be needed. It's a music video, so it should reflect the dynamics of the audio and make it more interesting to watch. I already prepared this before, so I just insert the markers. Now you can see the markers in the timeline and in all editors. I want to start the movement of the fireball at frame 380, so let's set an offset in the follow path constraint. Also I want the fireball to lift up a bit before moving, so I keyframe the set location at frame 150, move it up a bit, and then keyframe it again at frame 380, where it will start moving.
a funeral in my
Press I to set the keyframe.
and mourners to and fro.
Then when the fireball reaches the end of the spiral, it should move a bit more in front of the first tile and then slowly disappear. So let's set these parameters and keyframe them.
Was breaking through. And when they all were seated, a service like a drum kept beating till I thought my mind was going numb.
Okay, that looks right. Now let's make the fireball appear at the beginning of the session and disappear at the end. For this we need to add a build modifier starting at frame 1 with a length of 380 and another build modifier at the end of the animation, which is reversed, so the fireball will disappear. Now back to the female. At the start of the video it should stand firmly on the ground, and when the fireball disappears it should move just a bit up. So let's adjust the Z location and keyframe it. Then when the fireball disappears again, the female has to move a bit down in the Z location. Let's keyframe that. Now we are done with the basic movements of the female. So let's move on with the next step. After the fireball has disappeared near the end of the video, the female should kick the first tile so they will start falling. For this, let's import the kick animation. Let's rename the animation to kick. Go to frame 7000 in the nonlinear animation editor and add an action strip with the kick animation above the idle animation. Adjust the length of the animation. And delete the armature because we don't need it anymore. Now you can see the female kicking at the tile. Now let's set the blend factor between the idle and the kick animation so there will be a smooth transition. Next we will create a hidden sphere above the first tile, which will fall down and initiate the falling of the first tile. Let's adjust the location, rotation and scale. Apply all transforms. Set the origin of the sphere to the center of the mass and add a rigid body. The sphere should stay in place until the female kicks the first tile, so the animated box should be checked at first and then deselected when the woman starts kicking. We also should change some rigid body settings in the scene properties. Open rigid body world. Set the speed to 2 and increase the sub-steps and dissolver iterations so everything looks smooth. Now we need a few more models from Sketchfab, so let's go there again. They will be placed in some important parts of the video, so it looks a bit more interesting. First the ghost, let's save it as GLDF. Another ghost. And the phantom. Now let's import those 3 models. The ghost. Select the meshes inside the model. Hit Alt P to unparent them. And press Ctrl J to join them into one object. Now rename it and delete the Sketchfab model and move the mesh into the scene. Now next model, just repeat the same steps as before. That's a bigger one, so we should find all meshes inside the structure. Select them, unparent them and join them to one object. Rename it, move it into the scene and delete the Sketchfab model. Now let's import the third one and repeat the steps again. That's a big one, we will need to resize it later. Now press S to scale it down, way down. Now let's scale and place the ghost into the right position. That's why we set our markers before, so we know when the model should appear and disappear when the female passes it. Add two build modifiers, one for appearing and one for disappearing. And let's switch over to the shader editor to adjust the shading and emissions. Add a mix shader and an emission shader, set the emission color and plug it in. Then set the emission strength. Next we deal with the geisha mask, same process again. Adjust position, rotation and scale. Add the build modifiers. And same process with the phantom. Position, rotation and scale. Add the build modifiers for appearing and disappearing. And we are done. Next we will use a Boid particle system to let the flock of birds fly around the scene. So back to Sketchfab. Download a very basic birds animation. Import the GLTF file into our scene. That's a big one, we need to resize it. Rename it to bird. And rename the mesh inside the model to Birds Mesh. Now we want our bird to emit some blue light, so set the emission color and strength in the shader editor. Now let's scale down the bird, change the rotation and move it under our ground plane. Repeat the animation in the NLA editor. Next, create an empty object which will be the goal where the birds are flying to. I will add a link to a tutorial video about Boid systems below, so don't bother with any details now. Next, let's add a mesh quid where the birds will be emitted from. Adjust the location and rotation. Rename it to Birds Emitter. Now this emitter needs a particle system, so switch over to the tab, change the type to Boids. And let's add some features to the Boid's brain. That's basically what the birds will do during the scene. So the birds will first separate, then move to the goal, follow the leader and flock. Now we move the goal to different positions in the timeline, so the birds will change directions. Okay. Now we need to deal with our camera settings. Add an empty sphere which will be our tracking object. scale it down a bit, and rename it to camera tracker. Now let's add a damped track constraint, so the tracker will follow the spiral. Also add a follow path constraint. Let's also add a follow path constraint to the camera and the damped track constraint, and set the target to the tracker. Let's open a second window and let's change the location and rotation of the camera. In the left window you can see where the camera is pointing to. Track axis to -z, focal length 300. Now insert keyframes. Change position of the camera and keyframe again. Also change focal length. Let's change the offset to 380 so the camera starts moving with the fireball. Now go to the markers which we created before and change the focal length of the camera so there is a bit of a movement in the scene. Don't forget to keyframe the focal length. Now let's add another light to the scene. Change type, power, shape and size, and add a track constraint which points to the fireball. Let's add an audio visualizer to the power of the light. Insert keyframe, go to graph editor, select key, bake sound to F-curves, select our audio file and add an envelope modifier to scale it up. Maximum 3000, minimum 300. That should work. When you play the animation you can see that the power is changing according to the audio. Just a few more adjustments to the fireball so it matches with the size of the light. And as a final step we add some animations from Mixamo to the female. Let's import the Mixamo animations without skin, which we downloaded before. Rename the animation accordingly. Go to the keyframe where you want to set up the animation and add it to the strip. And let's delete the armature. Now repeat these steps for the other animations that we downloaded. That's basically the main reason why we set our markers before, as they indicate important changes in the music, so there should be also some changes in the video. Just to mention it again, you can download the whole Blender file with all models and animations. In case you want to use it for your own purpose, you can copy and modify anything and use it in your own videos. Well, I think we're done with our animations. So let's start the clip and see if everything looks alright. Looks good, so now we can go to the last step. Go to render, render animation. That will take a while. Okay, done. Now let's take a look at the final video. Well folks, that's all for today. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like and maybe subscribe to the channel, as I'm going to upload more videos like this. Also, please don't forget to visit Vero's music channel, link down below, where you can also watch the whole video and lots of more great stuff. Thanks for watching and see you soon.